The use of tools involves interposing another factor between the subject and this object, a factor that occupies an intermediate position not only in terms of space and time but also in terms of its content. For on the one hand a tool is a mere object which is mechanically effective, but on the other hand it is also an object that we not merely operate upon, but operate with, as with our own hands. The tool is an intensified instrument, for its form and existence are predetermined by the end, whereas in the primary teleological process natural objects are only later made to serve our purposes. The person who plants a seed in order to enjoy the fruit of the plant at a later date, instead of being satisfied with wild fruits, acts teleologically, but the purposive action is limited to his hand. If, however, he uses a spade and hoe, he removes himself further from the point at which natural processes operate by themselves, and he enhances the subjective factor in relation to the objective factor. By using tools, we deliberately add a new link to the chain of purposive action, thus showing that the straight road is not always the shortest. The tool is typical of what we might call our creations in the external world. On the one hand it is formed exclusively by our own powers, and on the other it is devoted entirely to our own purposes. Because the tool is not itself an end, it lacks the relative independence that the end implies, either as an absolute value or as something that will produce an effect upon us. It is an absolute means. The principle of the tool is not only effective in the physical world, where self-interest is not focused directly upon material production, but mental conditions or non-material events are involved. The tool attains a still more refined form, inasmuch as it is now really the creation of our will and does not have to compromise with the attributes of a material substance that is fundamentally alien to purpose. The most typical instances of this kind of tool are perhaps social institutions, by means of which the individual can attain ends for which his personal abilities would never suffice. Membership of a state provides the protection that is a prerequisite for most individual purposive action, but leaving aside this most general aspect, the particular institutions of civil law make possible for the individual achievements that would otherwise be denied to him. In the roundabout legal forms of contract, testament, adoption, etc., the individual possesses a collectively established tool that multiplies his own powers, extends their effectiveness, and secures their ends. Fortuitous elements are eliminated and the homogeneity of interests makes possible an increase in the services rendered. From the interaction of individuals there develop objective institutions which become the junction of countless individual teleological sequences and provide an efficient tool for otherwise unattainable purposes. It is the same with religious rites, which are tools of the Church, serving to objectify the typical emotions of the religious community. They are, no doubt, a digression from the ultimate end of religious sentiment, but a digression by means of a tool which, in contrast to all material tools, serves exclusively those ends that the individual is otherwise unable to attain. Money is the purest example of the tool here. Finally, we reach the point at which money finds its place in the interweaving of purposes. I will begin with some generally accepted facts. All economic transactions rest upon the fact that I want something that someone else owns, and that he will transfer it to me if I give him something I own that he wants. It is obvious that the final link in this two-sided process will not always be present when the first link appears. On many occasions I want the object A which A possesses, but the object or service B which I am willing to give in return does not interest A, or else the goods offered are acceptable to both parties, but no agreement can be reached about the respective quantities. Thus, it is of great value in the attainment of our purposes that an intermediate link should be introduced into the chain of purposes, something into which I can change B at any time and which can itself be changed into A, in much the same way as any form of power, from water, wind, etc., can be transformed into another form of power by means of a dynamo. Just as my thoughts must take the form of a universally understood language so that I can attain my practical ends in this roundabout way, so must my activities and possessions take the form of money value in order to serve my more remote purposes. Money is the purest form of the tool. In the category mentioned above, it is an institution through which the individual concentrates his activity and possessions in order to attain goals that he could not attain directly. The fact that everyone works with it makes its character as a tool more evident than was the case in the examples given earlier. The nature and effectiveness of money is not to be found simply in the coin that I hold in my hand. Its qualities are invested in the social organizations and the supersubjective norms that make this coin a tool of endlessly diverse and extensive uses, despite its material limitations, its insignificance and rigidity. It is characteristic of the state and of religious rites that, since they are constituted entirely by mental powers and do not have to compromise with any independent material objects, they can express their purpose fully in themselves. Yet they are so close to their specific purposes, indeed almost identical with them, that we often hesitate to recognize that they are tools, which would make them instruments without value in themselves, brought to life only by the will behind them, and regard them as ultimate moral values. In the case of money, its character as an instrument is very rarely obscured. By contrast with the other institutions mentioned earlier, money has no inherent relation to the specific purpose the attainment of which it aids. Money is totally indifferent to the objects because it is separated from them by the fact of exchange. What money mediates is not the possession of an object, but the exchange of objects. Money in its perfected forms is an absolute means because, on the one hand, it is completely teleologically determined and is not influenced by any determination from a different series, while on the other hand it is restricted to being a pure means and tool in relation to a given end, has no purpose of its own and functions impartially as an intermediary in the series of purposes. Money is perhaps the clearest expression and demonstration of the fact that man is a tool-making animal, which, however, is itself connected with the fact that man is a purposive animal. The concept of means characterizes the position of man in the world. He is not dependent as is an animal upon the mechanism of instinctual life and immediate volition and enjoyment, nor does he have unmediated power, such as we attribute to a god, such that his will is identical with its realization. He stands between the two in so far as he can extend his will far beyond the present moment, but can realize it only in a roundabout way through a teleological series which has several links. Love, which according to Plato is an intermediate stage between possessing and not possessing, is in the inner subjective life what means are in the objective external world. For man, who is always striving, never satisfied, always becoming, love is the true human condition. Means, on the other hand, and their enhanced form, the tool, symbolize the human genus. The tool illustrates or incorporates the grandeur of the human will, and at the same time its limitations. The practical necessity to introduce a series of intermediate steps between ourselves and our ends has perhaps given rise to the concept of the past, and so has endowed man with his specific sense of life, of its extent and its limits, as a watershed between past and future. Money is the purest reification of means, a concrete instrument which is absolutely identical with its abstract concept. It is a pure instrument. The tremendous importance of money for understanding the basic motives of life lies in the fact that money embodies and sublimates the practical relation of man to the objects of his will, his power and his impotence. One might say, paradoxically, that man is an indirect being.